So I wanted to answer the question that I've gotten from a number of folks regarding whether a legislator can reintroduce the same bill in the second year of the two-year session. So a legislator may want to reintroduce a bill, or an interest group may want them to reintroduce a bill that didn't make it to the governor's desk during the first year. So what are the applicable rules here? We look first at the joint rules and the joint rules of the Assembly and Senate. In Joint Rule 54, it's titled Introduction of Bills. It has several provisions. First is subdivision A, and that discusses the deadline for bill introductions and any exemptions from that deadline. Subdivision B concerns when the Assembly and Senate desks are open and what occurs after the printing of a bill. Now, subdivision C gives us guidance on reintroduced bills. And it says in subdivision C that unless approved by the Committee on Rules of the House of Origin, a member may not author a bill during a session that would have substantially the same effect as a bill the member previously introduced during that session. And then Joint Rule 54C goes on to specify that this restriction does not apply in cases where the previously introduced bill was vetoed by the governor, naturally, or its provisions were chaptered out by a later chaptered bill. See Government Code Section 9605, where the later enacted bill effectively chapters out the earlier enacted bill of the same code section. So as a result of this language that we have, a senator or an assembly member is prohibited from authoring a bill during the same two-year session if it would have substantially the same effect as a bill that that assembly member or senator had previously introduced during the session. Now, Joint Rule 54C doesn't define the phrase substantially the same effect, but the main limitation that's set forth is on the bill that was previously introduced in that same two-year session. So if we're in the second year of the two-year session, obviously the start of a new two-year session, this provision 54C does not come into effect. Also, if it's approved by the House of Origin Rules Committee, then they can be exempted from it. But so basically, unless approved as an exemption, right, the senator or assembly member can't reintroduce that same introduced version. Now, this language in 54C of the joint rules notably applies to the introduced version of the bill. You may recall that between a third and 40% of all introduced bills are spot or intent bills, which means unless you're reintroducing that same spot or intent bill, you're not affected by that limitation. Generally, the custom and practice of the two houses is that the legislator can introduce a bill that has been amended one or more times, so long as it's not the introduced version. Now, again, the first exemption to this prohibition is if the Assembly Committee on Rules approves it for an Assembly bill, or the Senate Committee on Rules grants approval for the same introduced Senate bill from the first year. The second and third exemptions are for a bill that was vetoed by the governor in the first year, or when the bill's provisions were chaptered out by a later enacted bill in the first year. So in those two instances, the same bill can be introduced word for word by the same exact legislator, again, because that bill didn't become law due to a veto by the governor or a chaptering out issue. In either case, it never became effective. Now, lastly, if a bill were reintroduced and another legislator wanted to question whether there was a violation of Joint Rule 54C, what happens? The rule says that an objection based on this restriction may be raised only when the bill is being considered by the House in which it was introduced. And upon objection, the chair of a committee, if the objection is raised in the committee hearing, or by the presiding officer, if that objection is raised on the floor, they may make a ruling on the stated objection to the bill. Once the House passes its House of Origin, an objection couldn't be lodged in the second House. Now, note that this objection to the bill may be re-referred to the Committee on Rules of the House in which the bill was introduced for the Rules Committee to make a determination. And in fact, the rule says that the respective rules committees in the Assembly and Senate can actually obtain assistance from the Office of Legislative Counsel regarding the quote unquote similarity of a bill that was previously introduced in the first year of the 2-year session so that the rules committees can make a proper determination.